From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Horror in Syria.
The entire video is too horrific to air, but these are a few images. This is Lieutenant Moaz Al-Qassas Bey, a 26-year-old Jordanian Air Force pilot. On December 24th, he was captured while flying a mission in Syria against the terrorist Islamic State forces, ISIS or ISIL. In a 22-minute video released this week by the Islamic State, Lieutenant Al-Qassas Bey was shown being led into a cage, drenched with flammable chemicals and burned alive. The video ends with the Islamic State offering a bounty to anyone who murders a pilot from any of the nations now fighting ISIS. Jordan had been hoping to make a prisoner exchange to secure the release of Lieutenant Al-Qassas Bey. Now it's too late. The Jordanian populace has reacted with swift fury. Thousands flocked to the streets in a national expression of rage, including Jordan's king, Abdullah II.
They have condemned a brave pilot who was defending his values and his nation. It is our duty to stand up as one to face this crisis, which will make us stronger and more united.
Jordan didn't just react with fury. Since the murder video was released, Jordan has executed a number of Islamic State-linked prisoners on death row.
Jordan has launched, quote-unquote, earth-shattering retaliatory airstrikes against ISIS. Also, ISIS is now claiming that these Jordanian airstrikes have killed 26-year-old female American hostage Kayla Mueller, a claim Jordan dismisses as a PR stunt. Question: does the murder of Lieutenant Qassas Bey require a change of strategy by the United States, Pat Buchanan?
Not the United States, no. I think we're doing fairly well degrading ISIS. But let me tell you, John, this is very serious. It's a turning point. This has propelled, stampeded Jordan into this war. And the king of Jordan, Abdullah, is a descendant of the prophet. He is a Sunni, and he is now taking the side de facto of Assad in Syria, who's an Alawite, of Iran, which is Shia, of Hezbollah, which is Shia, and of the United States. And he's got a very unstable kingdom. And I fear that down the road, this war, him getting into the war as actively as he has against ISIS, which is a Sunni terrorist group, I think he's really taking a risk with the future of his kingdom.
There'll be a lot of pressure put on President Obama to mount a ground offensive. What do you think of that, Ellen?
No, I think the immolation of the Jordanian pilot actually has galvanized the Jordanian people. The kingdom was ambivalent about this fight. The father of the pilot initially said, "Why are we fighting? This isn't our fight." Now it's their fight. And they are taking the fight to ISIS. Now, the bombing that's occurred, these are targets that were picked out by the Americans. The Americans are working very closely with the Jordanians.
What are they doing?
But they're coordinating these fights, and
they're refueling the jets.
Yes, and the Jordanians are writing verses from the Quran on the bombs, basically saying we're going to take back our religion. I mean, this could be a positive turning point because this is their fight. It's the world's fight. I mean, Japan has been brought in as well, but it's very much the fight of the Muslims who live in that part of the world, and I think we're seeing this really galvanized.
Is this war going to move into Syria?
Well, I mean, the war is ongoing in Syria. That's the heart of it at the moment. But the difficulty here, I think Pat makes a good point that
Syria has its own internal civil war going on.
Yeah.
But it has maintained itself to be outside of the particular range of war we're talking about.
Well, I mean, ISIS, the main base of operations is in Syria, where the murder of this pilot took place. I mean, Pat is right that there are internal pressures in Jordan, as with a lot of the different Sunni monarchies in the region. But at the same time, the murder of a young Sunni Muslim man in such a grotesque way, multiple camera angles, taking pleasure, sadistic pleasure from his death, It's a truly horrific video, I think, is a galvanizing point that shows it's not just about the United States. This idea of the US interfering is actually a lie, that it's about murdering Muslims. And again, this is what ISIS does in Fallujah, across the Sunni towns in Anbar and Syria and Deir ez-Zor. They murder innocent Muslim men, women, and children. And I think that recognition now is beginning to galvanize and hopefully will consolidate the other nations in this coalition to become part. One final thing, though, problem we still have with nations like Qatar, who are allowing private fundraisers to give a lot of money to these groups.
What?
Well, listen, I think what this is going to do, amongst other things, along with what was already stated, it's going to enable countries like Saudi Arabia to get dramatically involved with not only with financing, but with aircraft and other arms, and politically. So it's going to make a very big difference now in terms of who's going to be against ISIS, because they are all going to now join to, in effect, do whatever they can with ISIS.
The involvement of Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I believe Saudi Arabia will now join with Jordan in terms of going after.
But here's
that
the
would
problem.
be a huge step for Saudi Arabia.
It certainly would be, but they now know that they too are at risk.
Okay, on Thursday, President Obama delivered remarks at the National Prayer Breakfast against the backdrop of a world threatened by the brutal acts of Islamist terrorists. But Mr. Obama intimated that history provides examples of when Christians committed, in the name of religion, quote unquote, terrible deeds.
And lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ.
Question: why are some critics taking extreme umbrage at these remarks? Didn't Christians use religion to justify the Inquisition? Buchanan.
Let's take the Crusades, John. Pope Urban II at Claremont, I think it was 1096, launched the crusade. Do you really believe the crusade was just like what Osama bin Laden did when he launched this war of terror? That's an absurdity. I mean, to compare Christianity, which basically, what did it come out of, John? In first three centuries of the Roman Empire, it didn't conquer the way Islam did, by war and by armies. It conquered by persuading and converting people. John, but let me make a point about this. This previous question you've got, if Saudi Arabia and they're all going to send troops, the key question is, where are the soldiers going to come from who are going to fight in Syria to defeat ISIS's troops in Syria? The Saudis haven't gone in. The Turks could do it in an afternoon. They haven't. It's this Sunni problem we're talking about, the fact that the Sunnis feel they cannot support Assad, who's a Shia.
Well, the Jordanians are mobilizing troops, and they have a very fine fighting force, and they have incredible intelligence agents. I don't know that they're going to go in, but you know, the Obama strategy looks like it might be believable that the countries in that region will take the fight, and that Americans aren't going to put troops on the ground. But on the religion thing, lots of terrible things have been done in the name of religion over the centuries, and it's a perversion of what religion proclaims to be. And the president made that allusion, and I think it's entirely appropriate.
He's bringing up the Inquisition when we just saw somebody burned to death. I mean, the Inquisition. 1492.
Well, I'm sure he could find other examples more recent that would get you even more worked up.
In Spain, yeah.
So he's bringing up 300 years of horror.
Well, you go back to the Crusades, are what is it, 900 or 1,000 years ago?
Well, it's the span of time. This was a one-time event.
Well, what is he doing bringing this up at a prayer breakfast where the event of the week is this slaughter and massacre and burning to death of this pilot?
What do you think of what the president did?
It's man's inhumanity to man, and it didn't start this year.
Well, I think he's trying to show that, yes, there are historical legacies of terror on the part of every religion, but the problem is the contemporary threat is from a specific brand of Salafi extremism, and it is from a specific brand of Shia extremism supported by Iran.
Well, I'm off on another track now. I want to hear you tell me something about the Inquisition.
The Inquisition, okay.
What do you know about it?
Well, I know the Inquisition was conducted across Europe, and many people were made to torture and suffer for their
faith. Who were the bad guys?
Thomas de Torquemada was one of the bad guys.
Who else? What was he? Who was he?
He was the Grand Inquisitor. In Spain. He was in Spain.
Was he a cleric?
I believe he was a Dominican. Dominicans did that. The Jesuits did other things, John.
Well,
Jesuits weren't even in existence for most of the time.
Yeah, they came in at the Council of Trent.
Do you want what different
well, I think
measures
the
of torture?
president, we've got to try to figure out how far off.
But the
president
the serious issue is across the Middle East, Muslims are being abused by other Muslims who have taken on the mantle of the religion. That has to end. The president has to face up to that because ultimately it's a political rod in Islam.
I think we've chewed this up
Yes.
enough, don't you? Issue 2, Obama, the budgeteer.
The president provided the American people a good laugh yesterday. He sent up his budget. More taxes, more spending, bigger government here in Washington, the same old policies that have failed for the last 6 years. That's not what the American people want.
President Obama sent Congress a whopping $3.99 trillion budget proposal this week. Mr. Obama wants Congress to join him in shredding the Budget Control Act of 2011 and hiking federal spending by 7% next fiscal year. Under the president's proposal, the Pentagon gets a 4.5% budget boost. Domestic agencies are freed from the spending caps known as sequestration. So, 100,000 new federal workers to be hired, and those already on the payroll will get 1.3% pay hikes. The president also wants taxes to go up. Get this, his budget proposes $1.44 trillion in new taxes over the coming decade. Starting next year, the capital gains rate would nearly double from 15% when President Obama took office to 28%. First, corporations. They get hit with a 14% one-time tax. That money would then pay for a public works and infrastructure program with a price tag of $478 billion. Second, individual taxpayers. They would get hit with $746 billion in new tax dollars. How? By ending deductions and limiting contributions to individual retirement accounts, IRAs. Over 10 years, the Obama budget would add to the national debt an increment of $6 trillion, bringing it to an all-time high of $24 trillion, up from today's $18 trillion.
The U.S. Congress will vote on this Obama budget. Is Speaker Boehner right in his description of it?
More taxes, more spending, bigger government here in Washington, the same old policies that have failed for the last 6 years.
What?
Well, I mean, I think there is some truth to what he says. On the other hand, the president has to deal with a very weak economy, relatively, and we're going to have these kinds of deficits. The real question is now, how are we going to be able to get some of these deficits under control? Because at some point, there's going to be a real crisis, a financial crisis, as our debts just accumulate. If you look at it now, for example, you will see that the deficits are going to continue to go through the next half dozen years, and we're going to be in a situation where the debt's going to the debt service is going to use up a lot of our funds, and if we get any kind of inflation, okay, you'll get a much higher interest rate, and you'll get a much higher debt service obligation, leaving much less for whatever we need in the country to service the country's
the deficit has fallen precipitously during the Obama years. Austerity politics have hurt Europe. The U.S. economy is really beginning to move quite robustly. We've had extraordinary job growth the last couple of months, the best since 1998, the heyday of the Clinton years. The president is going in with this budget with a strong economy behind him and a feeling among the Republicans that they are now in charge. They're going to have to come back with their own ideas. Let's see what they want to do. They want to bust the cap on the sequester. With the threats we face, Republicans, Democrats alike think you don't want to continue to starve the Pentagon. Bringing money home from abroad that corporations are sheltering, or a one-time tax, which is much lower than the tax they would normally pay, and rebuild an infrastructure that everybody sees is collapsing. There's some confluence of interest here. This budget is going to have some impact, and there's going to be some positive programs coming out of it.
Political document entirely, John. It's like a platform statement of the Democratic Party. But I think it's effective in some ways, in the sense that Obama's pushing the Republicans to come out in favor, basically, of more spending on defense and defending rich folks and wealthy folks and people who inherit money, defending them and all their benefits and then he's aiding, you know, community colleges. It's a good Democratic ploy, but I don't think it's going anywhere. But there are small ball deals that you can probably cut on the corporate income tax rate and things like that, and on infrastructure, and bringing all that money home from abroad.
Obama puts forth a whole series of programs that are going to cost billions and billions of dollars at this stage of the game. This is not the time, in my judgment, to do that.
Okay, who owns the debt?
The national debt today is $18 trillion. Under Mr. Obama's new budget, it will rise to $24 trillion, more than double the $10.6 trillion level when he took office 6 years ago. Who owns that debt? If you say China, guess again. About 30% of the national debt is owned by, get this, the federal government itself in the Social Security Trust Fund and military funds and federal pension funds. The Federal Reserve and state and local governments own another 20% of the federal debt. Another 15% is owned by mutual funds and private pension funds. In short, the majority of the national debt is owned by and therefore owed to American workers and American retirees. Also, foreign owners account for some 30% of the debt. China holds the biggest chunk of the U.S. debt, $1.25 trillion. Japan is second, $1.22 trillion. Belgium is third. The Caribbean islands, hosting international banks, fourth. Other U.S. foreign debt holders range from Switzerland to Russia.
Question, who gets hurt the most if the U.S. defaults on its debt? On its national debt? I ask you.
I think the people who get hurt the most are the American people, more specifically younger Americans. And I think it's unlikely that the US would ever default on the debt. But the problem is here, and reflected in the president's budget, at least from someone from my generation, the president portrays this budget as something that it is the product of a better economic situation. In some sense, that is true. But the problem is the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says from 2018, because of baby boomers retiring and the entitlement pressures that are already huge, the deficit spirals again. So for my generation, the problem is if we're not reforming these things, we're putting all this more spending in, we're taxing things like which go towards investments like capital gains, which most economists say is really not a good idea to do. It's bad. It's bad for my generation. We need entitlement reform, and the president has no interest in that.
Let me ask him this. Who gets hurt the most if the U.S. defaults on its national debt?
Yeah, okay.
Who gets hurt the most?
Well, the lower income Americans, and I'll tell you why, because as we get interest rates will go up, and people will not have the ability to be able to take loans. And
what I have here is Social Security recipients get hurt the most. Retired federal workers get hurt the second most. Retired military personnel the third. More broadly, the state and local governments and pension funds that have invested in the U.S. Treasury, they get hurt.
This is the biggest straw man I've seen for quite a long time.
John, they're not going to
do We're dealing with an economy that really is beginning to take hold. The full faith of the American government is behind these various financial instruments. China is not going to raise the interest rates and throw us into default, because what's that old line? You owe $1,000 to your banker, it's your problem. You owe $10 million, it's the banker's problem. We have quite a stable system here right now, and the president is correct that we need to invest in infrastructure, education.
Let him finish. Hurry up.
We need to invest in infrastructure and education and begin to look at the world we're creating and the generations that are coming along.
Let me tell you how you're going to get out of the debt.
Send an email to President Obama.
John, let me tell you how you're going to get out of the debt.
What?
We're going to inflate our way out of the debt. Look, used to be a silver dollar was worth $1. You can now get 20 paper dollars. The United States and all these other countries, all this world debt eventually is going to be inflated away and floated away, and we're not going to default.
All right, we don't want this to be wasted rectitude on our part, doing what no one else will do in a talk show in Washington, D.C. or anywhere. The exit question is this. Is this budget dead on arrival in Congress? Yes or no?
The big budget's dead, but they're going to have small deals.
Small deals?
Yeah.
It's not dead. They're going to get some family-friendly things because the Republicans want to appeal to the middle class as well. You're going to get something on tax reform, and you're probably going to bust the caps on defense. And if you bust the caps on defense, you got to get more spending. So
the New York Times calls this Obama's utopian vision.
Well, it is.
Now, did utopia exist?
Did utopia ever exist? The eye of the beholder, subjective interpretation of utopia, right?
Right. So what's going to be the impact of this?
Well, I think one problematic impact of it is we're talking about ISIS at the moment, National Security Challenge. The president as commander-in-chief is using military spending from an ideological point of view. He's saying, you're not going to get military spending. Commander-in-chief, I'm not going to fulfill that responsibility unless I get what I want. From a liberal democratic point of view, another domestic spending. I think that's an extraordinary neglect of responsibility at a critical moment.
It's
He's the commander-in-chief.
I want to hear from Mort. I want to hear from Mort.
Look, we have a terrifically difficult issue here to face, okay? We simply cannot run up all these deficits forever. One of the things that is going to happen at some point is inflation, okay? And if that inflation hits, then we're really going to be in trouble. So we've got to be very careful about how we handle this. At some point...
How do you avoid it?
How do you
long
avoid
have
it?
you been
They're not going to touch
predicting
the
inflation?
entitlements. Neither party's going to touch the entitlements.
At some point, you have to make a conclusion here that somebody gets into office who knows how to lead the country to deal with some of these issues. We've done it before. Ronald Reagan, if I may say so, did that. You probably heard of him.
More.
So the only thing I'm saying to you is that you've got to find leadership to deal with this issue.
That's a pretty underhanded way to get at Obama.
Words to live by, Mort. Issue 3, measles menace.
I've heard of many tragic cases of walking, talking, normal children who wound up with profound mental disorders after vaccines. I'm not arguing vaccines are a bad idea. I think they're a good thing. But I think the parents should have some input. The state doesn't own your children. Parents own the children, and it is an issue of freedom.
There has to be a balance, and it depends on what the vaccine is, what the disease type is, and all the rest.
The latest measles menace began 6 weeks ago in December at Disneyland, California. Now the measles outbreak has spread across the nation, infecting over 100 people. Measles is a highly contagious virus transmitted through the air. Its symptoms, which follow some 10 days after infection, include sore eyes, spots inside the mouth, high fevers, rashes, aches, and pains. Worldwide, measles killed 145,000 people last year, yet it can be prevented by a simple vaccination. Why do outbreaks like these occur? Experts say the culprits are those parents who refuse to accept the overwhelming scientific consensus that vaccinations are safe. The problem is that some children cannot be vaccinated because of pre-existing medical conditions that also make them more vulnerable to serious health problems if they contract measles. These children are thus endangered by parents who refuse to vaccinate their own children. But there is potential political toxicity with vaccinations. Here's President Obama today.
There is every reason to get vaccinated. There aren't reasons to not.
But as a candidate in 2008, 7 years ago,
And autism, I think, is a prime candidate where we've seen just a skyrocketing autism rate. Nobody knows exactly why. There's some people who are suspicious that it's connected to vaccines. Those vaccines are also preventing huge numbers of deaths among children.
Question, what action, if any, should the government take if a parent refuses to vaccinate a child against a virus like measles? Tom Rogan.
Well, a child is the responsibility of parents. It is not the responsibility of the state to interfere in the life of a family and say vaccination is forced. But here's the caveat, and it's a big caveat. If a parent is unwilling to vaccinate their child for these things, they should be excluded from educational facilities, from the public arena, because as much as government doesn't have the right to enter that private domain, nor does it have the responsibility to allow that private individual, based on that, in my opinion, poor choice, to enter the public domain and endanger other children. It's outrageous that that's happening, and it's really quite stunning that in the United States in the 21st century we have this issue with some parents, for whatever reason, think that it's okay.
Mo, do you share that view?
More or less, yes, I do. But I think we are in a situation now where there's a kind of almost know-nothing view of what the value of a lot of these vaccinations is. I'm really just astounded by it. I mean, if you look at polio, for example, there were vaccinations that just saved God knows how many lives. Are you going to say that these vaccinations are meaningless?
Right.
I mean, this is not casually done. They're all tested. They have to be gone through an extraordinary process of review by the federal government before they can be distributed. So, I mean, it's an irrational point of view.
Okay, here's what Hillary Clinton tweeted about vaccinations. Quote, "The science is clear. The earth is round. The sky is blue. And hashtag vaccines work. Let's protect all our kids." Unquote. What do you make of that?
Well, John, I lived in a home, you probably did too, with 9 kids where we were constantly quarantined for measles, mumps, scarlet fever, polio, all these other things. I'm a great believer in these vaccines. But there is a moral question, and there is a question of, I mean, if parents believe, say, Christian Scientists, they do not automatically want this done. I think they themselves don't have to have it done, but it's really a question of whether you vaccinate these kids. And I agree basically with Tom. In the last analysis, I don't think you can take a child and force a needle into its arm, a vaccine, if the parents resist.
Well,
what happens if that child infects a lot of other people because they have
Tommy to be quarantined?
Right, and you have pediatricians now who are saying they're not going to accept patients who are not vaccinated because they have other children in their waiting rooms who are have immune systems that are compromised and can't be vaccinated.
But the flu kills far more than measles, and we can all optionally take or not take the flu vaccine, and we do.
Yeah, that's very different from children who are entering into public schools. I mean, most public schools require you to take the vaccines, and enough people comply that we have what's called sort of a herd immunization. And we should point out that when candidate Obama made those comments about the link between autism and vaccines, that was when there was still some thought that there was a causation, and that those studies have been totally debunked.
Predictions, Pat, be quick.
Great crisis coming over the Ukraine, over the question of whether America is going to send weapons to Ukraine. Merkel and Hollande are right now in Moscow trying to cut a deal.
As long as the Republican presidential wannabes keep tripping over each other in stupid comments like they made this last week about vaccinations, Hillary Clinton will delay her formal entry into the race.
Are you serious?
Well, letting the Republican have center stage. Just sit back and enjoy.
Tom.
Jordan will introduce special forces into Syria and Iraq.
Yes, and Saudi Arabia will join Jordan in both of those fields because they can no longer stay independent of all of this.
Governor John Kibitzer from Oregon will resign from office before Easter. Bye-bye.